Support for this program is provided by
Hey everyone, I'm Will Glover. Welcome to this month's Future of Work Town Hall. Today we'll get a preview of the upcoming Mackinac Policy Conference, where some of the focus will be on Michigan's auto industry. And because they are seasoned veterans of not just the policy conference, but all things Michigan, I'll be handing this conversation over to One Detroit contributors Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. But first, welcome guys. Welcome to the Future of Work. How's it going?
Hey, it's good to be with you, Will. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So for some of the people who may not be really familiar with what the policy conference is, just give us a quick overview. What is the policy conference? Who's going to be there? And how does what happens at the policy conference impact Michiganders' lives?
You mean other than the drinking and carrying on, right?
Right.
We're not supposed to talk about that, Nolan. So the policy conference, I like to say, is the annual gathering of the thinkers and doers in the political, business, and nonprofit sectors here in Michigan. It is the largest gathering of that kind in our state. And, it takes all of those people away from their home communities and the day-to-day grind of their jobs, puts them up on Mackinac Island together, and hopes to inspire the kind of conversations that lead to solution making that we can't get to when we're not on Mackinac. And I always like to go back to point out the things that have happened while we have been on Mackinac that were so important to the state. Of course, the deal to build a second crossing across the Detroit River was finalized up on Mackinac. The deal to come up with a grand bargain to help Detroit exit bankruptcy in a way that would set it up for the future, that came together on Mackinac. The auto insurance reform package was finalized on Mackinac. It really is a place where the kinds of things, the kinds of innovation, the kinds of ideas that we can't seem to break through with in our normal lives, it becomes possible. And so, we always look forward to it because you never know what's going to happen while you're up there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's unique in America too. I don't think there's any other city, any other state that has the equivalent of this, where you take a region's top decision makers, put them together for 3 or 4 days in a place where they can't get away from each other, and force them to talk about the issues and get to know one another. There's a lot of things happens up there that obviously it's not on the agenda, and a lot of people develop relationships, come up with ideas for how to work together during these few days on the island. I think it's a very, very valuable get together for the people of this region.
Right. So with that, you have some guests who are very well qualified to talk about one of the things that's going to be a focus of the policy conference, which is the auto industry. So with that, I will hand the reins over to you, Nolan. And remember, please, this is a brand new streaming show. So if you break it, you buy it. But
we will be very mindful of that and very well behaved. Yeah, well, thanks. We're joined by our good friends, Sandy Baruah, who is president, executive, and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, and Glenn Stevens, who's executive director of MICHauto. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you guys.
Thank you.
So I'm sure you all read Daniel House's column this week. If you didn't, you can go back and read it at DetroitNews.com.
Look at that, already advertising on the screen.
I love the pitch, Nolan.
We're trying to get a little stream across when we can.
Operators are standing by.
It's a pretty sobering column. I mean, Dan reported that out of some 70 electric vehicle projects that are planned across America, worth $200 billion, Michigan is only competitive for 9 of them. When you think about that, what does it say to you about our place, our future place, as the motor capital of the world?
Well, let's let Glenn go first. He's a little bit closer to it, but I definitely want to comment as well.
Well, I think the piece was spot on. I think Daniel also mentioned some things that are very positive attributes about what's going on too. And there are success stories. However, we've been doing this for 120 years and you can't rest on anything. We've learned that over the years. So when you look at, are we competitiveness or do we have competitiveness? You have to look at some key things. And he brings up a couple. I mean, site prep, incentives, non-labor inputs, the business climate. But what I think he was really driving, are we a collaborative state? And do we have the talent and the workforce together with those other things that are important? And so I would say that's a yes and a no.
Yeah, Nolan, here's the rub. I mean, the real story is that, we have this transition that's occurring in the auto industry. We owned the first and last century of what was known as global mobility. Global mobility is now changing. And not only do we need to have the economic development incentive tools, and Glenn mentioned things like site prep, right? Because if we have to be more than competitive, not just competitive with the other states, because it was really hard to break into the auto industry for the first 100 years. It is less hard now. It's still incredibly difficult, but it seems like everybody and their dog thinks that they can take a run at being an auto manufacturer. Now, being an OEM, being that final assembler, I think everyone is finding that much harder. Even Tesla is finding it much harder than they thought it would be. But these parts of the supply chain, like the batteries, like the subassemblies that are changing dramatically, we need to be super competitive there. And especially with batteries. When you think about batteries are very heavy. They are a huge value component of an electric vehicle, right? I mean, it's probably anywhere between a quarter or maybe even 30% of the cost of an electric vehicle will be the battery itself. And even though there are fewer parts in an EV than there are in an ICE engine vehicle, when you think about the parts that actually go into the fully assembled battery, that evens out pretty quickly. So there's a lot more value in the supply chain. Michigan needs to capture that.
So I want to start by saying something that I say almost every time I have a conversation about the auto industry and its role, not just in Michigan, but in America and about its future. I always want to first push back against the criticism that Detroit and that Michigan have taken for so long about this idea of being a single industry town and betting on one horse instead of spreading the investment around. As Glenn pointed out, we are coming up on 120 years that this industry has not just fueled the economy of this city and this state, but has defined manufacturing and industry in this country. We did not make a bad bet. And name another industry that has sustained anything for that long. But I do think that we have bet on it maybe in the wrong way, or not bet as fully on it as we can, and that's what we're facing right now. If you think of the things that are changing in the industry, the things that are challenging us, talent development, education, investment in the infrastructure of the future, that's where we're challenged, and we got to kind of pivot to make sure that maybe we get another century out of this. But certainly, lots of other people in lots of other states are betting hard on the idea of the future of autos or mobility or whatever you want to call it. So I want to start by talking specifically about talent and how much we have been talking about talent for several decades here in Michigan, and our failure to pivot hard enough to make sure that we are developing the kind of talent that will lead the future of autos and the future of work in autos. So Sandy, I know this is something you have spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about and trying to encourage our political leaders in particular to do better. Bring us up to date with where we are on talent. How far behind are we, and what do we need to do to catch up?
We are very behind. I wish I could spin that a little bit differently, but we are in a bad situation when it comes to talent. One, you look at our K through 12 system in Michigan. We're not producing the pipeline of high enough quality K through 12 grads. That's not just an urban thing. People love to think, oh, that's just a Detroit or Flint thing. That is statewide. Even our highest performing high schools and some of our most affluent communities in the state underperform their national peers, let alone their international peers. Secondly, when you think about the progress that we make in terms of the students that do enroll in either in a 2-year or a 4-year program, we're seeing some improvement there. That's good. That's nice. But in terms of the success rate of that first day of enrolling in a credential program or a 2-year, 4-year program and getting that diploma at the end of that process, our percentage there is not high enough. And then obviously we all know that we can and should do a better job retaining this talent. This, you need to overlay yet another issue, which is the type of talent that is necessary for this next generation mobility is different than what built the existing auto industry. When you think about, the combination of IT and electrification is very different than what the engineering talent we needed for, say, ICE engines or body on frame vehicles. So we need a different mix of talent, and we have not been fast enough, especially with our higher ed system, working with the industry to say, these are the kinds of engineers, these are the kinds of professionals that we are going to need to drive, the next generation of mobility here in Michigan. And this is where some other states have done a better job. And that's why we're seeing the mobility industry, disperse across the country. It's not, necessarily densified here in Michigan because other states are offering some pretty attractive talent options.
So Sandy, before I go to Glenn to get his response to this, talk about, you said we're woefully behind. What's a realistic time frame? What's a realistic plan within a time frame to get us back into this game and to get us to the front of it?
Well, our goal that we set about 4 years ago was to get 60% of our adults across the 11 counties of Southeast Michigan to 60% of our adults to have either a 2-year or 4-year degree or a skilled certificate. Right now, we're at about 49%. So how do you get that next, 11 or 12% in the next handful of years? It's a big lift. One, the biggest and best opportunity we have, Stephen, is that we have 750,000 adults in Southeast Michigan today that have either some college or have enrolled in some sort of professional certificate program but didn't complete it. If we were able to tap a whole bunch of those folks and say, listen, you're halfway there to your 2-year degree or 4-year degree, let's help you finish that degree. Let's remove the cost barriers. Let's work with your employer to make it more conducive for you to finish that. That would be a boon to our businesses today because our talent pool will just dramatically increase. And it's the fastest way. It's certainly faster than starting, at the K through 12 level and having to work through that system.
Yeah. So Glenn, you work in the industry and see this talent gap up close. Is your assessment the same? And then tell us what you would do or have us do to close it.
So I want to come back to one of the points you made real quick, and that is the industry and the bet we made. And I would suggest that, in fact, I would say emphatically that the next 100 years can be a good bet for us, provided we embrace the diversification that's going on in the industry. And that diversification should be something that we utilize the industry as a platform for. When you look at machine learning, artificial intelligence, connectivity, that's the industry of today. And Michigan can grow its economy around those things, provided it has the talent. I would completely concur with Sandy. I mean, the fundamentals are alarming. They just flat out are. We can't, with the work we're doing in the industry, solve for all the issues. But what I do feel is that there's action going on. Governor Snyder set some things in motion. Governor Whitmer's administration has picked them up. I got off the phone with Carrie Ebersol and the MEDC just a little while ago talking about action on talent. I just got off the call with the community colleges and a foundation that's supporting some work there, all around high-tech talent. Because Sandy's right. I mean, we still have four wheels and a platform, but the propulsion system's changing, and the fact that there's technology stacked and the vehicle becomes a telco provider. And that's where the monetization is going to be very, very seriously for the OEMs in the future. And that's where Michigan's got to be able to lead and play, and that's dependent on high-tech talent. And if you ask me what would I do, it would be more and more investment in high-tech talent, and that's what we're working on right now.
Yeah,
Hey, Stephen, I'm sorry, Nolan. Just Stephen, real quickly, just on the point that you and Glenn have made about, the bet, the industry bet on automotive. When you look at countries around the world, they are all either have tried or are trying or have succeeded in creating an automotive industry. And that has been a priority. Look at China. China made it a national priority literally 30 years ago to develop an auto industry. And you're seeing that in Mexico. You're seeing that in Vietnam. We are now about to have available for sale in the United States fully assembled, fully legalized cars made from Vietnam, for sale here in the United States, all electric vehicles. I mean, so most countries are dying for an automotive industry because there's no other industry that has the ripple impacts, the positive ripple impacts that the mobility and auto industry do.
Yeah, they're actually going to build those vehicles, those Vietnamese, VinFast, the name of the company, in North Carolina.
Glenn, when my father first came up here, he walked into the Chrysler plant with an 8th grade education and a strong back. What's the minimal skill level today? What's that base level skill that someone would need to get into the auto industry?
Well, it's an interesting question, and you can look at it a couple different ways. So first of all, I think it's safe to say, and everybody here knows, but I'll underscore that every job classification, the Brookings Institute measures this, requires more and more digital skills and more digital. It doesn't matter what job classification you're in. So I think we have to keep that in mind. I was with a company this morning that is based in Montreal. It has an operation here. They have a very progressive and aggressive talent strategy. They believe 75%, this is a very tech-heavy company. They believe 75% of their talent is going to come from community colleges and above, 4-year and advanced degrees, and 25% can come from non-traditional means, like things like the coding academies and things like that. But, a high school degree and certification, meaning some form of educational attainment beyond that, that could be everything from a welding certificate to an advanced degree in vehicle connectivity. That's what we need for the industry here in Michigan.
I want to remind people who are watching the live stream that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we will forward them to our panelists for answers a little later in the show. Let's talk about some of the other things that we aren't doing quite right with regard to leading on auto. And let's talk specifically about this battery production issue that, that is going to be the frontier, I think, of who gets to decide an awful lot of things about where we go with mobility. I want to start with an assessment on where we are with the idea of being able to produce batteries, these new batteries and the new technology with them here in Michigan. And then how important it is for us to be able to dominate on that. Glenn, is that something that we ought to be really concerned about and focused on?
Well, I think you have to look at it from a couple different perspectives. First of all, we have 12 assembly plants in Michigan. And at some point, those vehicles and those plants are going to be all electrified, which in the case of Factory Zero in Hamtramck, and in the case of the new Ford F-150 facility, those already are 100% electrified. But eventually, all of them will be. So the question is the supply chain there to support those assembly plants? And do we solidify that supply chain around them? Because if we don't, I would say that those plants are at risk. The other part of it is what's the new growth? What's the new growth? How can you participate in the other parts of the supply chain? Because a battery is very complex. It has materials, but it really becomes a cell and then a module and then a pack, as Sandy was talking. And they're very heavy and they need to be close to assembly. So we've done some really good things, strategic investments like the new General Motors investments, but we're going to have to continue to solidify the supply chain around the assembly plants we have, while at the same time diversifying our manufacturing around what's needed. And that means more battery components, more microprocessors and semiconductors, because that's where the growth is in manufacturing and R&D too.
Yeah. Sandy, I wonder if the focus on battery itself is maybe short-sighted. And I guess I'm trying to call on your experience with the SBA in Washington. It's not about one thing or one product, right? When you're talking about an industry, a sector of the economy, there are lots of different things. And batteries are the thing today, but will they be in 30 years or in 50 years? We don't really know. Are we missing something if we make this just about battery and just about today's technology?
Yeah, Stephen, great question, and I'll expand on Glenn's answer here. So when you think about the importance of battery production, we need to think about it, especially as Michiganders, not as, we want to be a battery production hub. That's part of it, and yes, there's good jobs there, but we need to think of it, frankly, as almost a defensive move. Glenn talked about the number of OEM final assembly plants that we have in the state, and as they transition to electrification, there is no guarantee that an existing plant today that is building an internal combustion engine car or truck will automatically transform into an EV plant. Obviously, Ford's done that with the Lightning production. GM's doing that with Factory Zero, as Glenn mentioned. There is zero guarantee that will ripple through all the other ones. So what will protect that, right? Number one, as Glenn said so spot on, is protecting that supply chain that feeds that plant. Again, batteries are really heavy. They're really complex. No one's going to want to ship batteries over long distances. It's, obviously we're seeing supply chain issues now. People are going to want the supply chain close, especially for something that is that heavy, because it becomes very, very costly. So if we want to avoid the potentiality of having these big automotive manufacturing plants that we have scattered throughout Michigan, particularly in the Detroit region, potentially going fallow, because as ICE engine production ends and these vehicles become electrified, they now are assembled someplace else. And the more that you can keep manufacturing and the supply chain here in Michigan, the more likely you're going to keep the research and development and the headquarters and administration jobs. That is absolutely critical. So we have to look at the entire supply chain and not look at the battery as just one unit. And just one last thing, and I know going on just a bit here. Back in the late 70s, everyone wanted to be a silicon wafer manufacturing hub, right? Even places without water and electricity, which were kind of like two key points about building silicon wafers, everyone thought they would be that. Everyone thought in the 2000s they were going to be a biotech hub, right? You need to have the fundamental assets to be able to support that kind of new industry. We need to do more in Michigan to ensure that battery production is welcomed and we have a competitive advantage there, because it's important to keeping the rest of the supply chain here and all the value-added jobs that creates for Michigan.
Well, Sandy, I think that brings us to maybe perhaps the final question in this segment, and that is government incentives and tax breaks. Michigan's had a love-hate relationship with those over the years. Sometimes we're very aggressive and competitive. Sometimes we step back and don't get into that game. What's the right place now, particularly as we try to draw in battery manufacturers? What's the right place for Michigan to be in terms of government incentives?
Well, we need to be in the game. And Nolan, you just highlighted the problem in Michigan. We do not have a consistent business attraction strategy in this state. You just look at the last three governors. They've had different approaches. Right. So the business community internationally really doesn't know from frankly year to year what's happening with Michigan's incentives. Right now we. Thanks to Glenn's work and our work and several other organizations, we got some nice incentive packages passed in December that got us to, the nice GM announcement in January. We potentially have some other announcements pending, but it's not enough. So, Nolan, we need to be in the game. We need to be in the game consistently, regardless who the governor is. And we need to be in the game with, frankly, money to spend. Because if we don't, somebody else will, and they are.
So that's public dollars. As we go into segment 2 of our conversation today and look at private dollars and in terms of venture capital and entrepreneurship, for a long time, this auto industry was started here by entrepreneurs, but for a long time, we sort of lost our entrepreneurship edge in Michigan. There wasn't a whole lot of new startup companies. We're starting to see a flurry of that now, aren't we, Glenn? And is there the financial support, the venture capital here to develop those startups and keep them here?
Yeah, I think that's really key because the talent pipeline and new innovation and startup communities, they're hand in hand, really. And when you look across the state, we've got pockets of excellence. And so today we'll just focus on the mobility sector. When you look at just Detroit, when you look at what's going on with a program that we run called the Innovator Exchange to enable startups in mobility, you look at programs in Industry 4.0 like at Centropolis up at Lawrence Tech. But I really would say you look at the train station and how important that's going to be to the ecosystem for new innovation. Because if the environment's not there for a startup to want to come here, and there's no question that the customers are here, the consumers of technology, the OEMs and the suppliers are here. So we have to make sure that we have an environment for them that's welcoming, but the money's got to follow too. And we have, according to the Michigan Venture Capital Association, we have done pretty well in that area, but we're going to have to double and triple down to feed that new innovation here. And that's going to be critical. That's absolutely going to be critical.
Glenn, what is an auto worker going to look like in 10 years? And I ask that because we're talking about the future of work, right? And we're talking about what that will be for so many people. Right now, we count on the auto industry to employ lots and lots and lots of people. That's how our economy in particular in Michigan works. If there are fewer jobs, if there is less need for the kind of skilled but still heavily manual labor that is involved in the industry, what will people here be asked to do? What will people be doing? And what will we need to prepare them to do in this industry?
Well, I don't think there's any question that today and into the future, they're going to deal with and have to work with more automation. That's just the way it's going with Industry 4.0. So the fact that the factory has more automation means that there are people that need to work on that automation, program it, maintain it, control it, and even operate it. So an auto worker of today, as it continues to evolve, they already have a high demand for, again, those digital skills that I referenced, but that's only going to continue on. We had Senator Peters had a hearing here recently about the supply chain, and the UAW came to serve comments too. And I was really impressed with the gentleman from the UAW because they were looking at how much the vehicle is transformed, the amount of electronics in it today versus what will be in the future. And I think they have their sights on it, and they know that they're going to need to be more skilled digitally than they ever are today. Will there always be manual labor? Yes, but less and less of it, but more interface and more programming and maintenance of the machines that are really going to drive the productivity that keeps Michigan competitive.
Sandy, we look at Michigan and its its position in the country. We're right now watching just this awful drought in the Southwest. Lake Mead's drying up. Dead lobsters are popping out of barrels. Michigan has tremendous water resources, which I've got to believe are going to be even more valuable as climate change makes places like the Southeast and Southwest a whole lot drier. What do we need to do to exploit those resources as well as to protect them?
Glenn was just talking to someone who's very much in the next generation automotive space, a real innovator, and his view, and I'll let Glenn talk about it. Is that the Great Lakes region is really going to be one of the most attractive regions in the United States to live, probably sooner than we think. One, because of climate change. Two, we already have, the advantages of being on an international border with our friendliest neighboring country, but also, we are less prone to things like earthquakes. So we have a very stable geographic and climate in this region, which is only going to get better. And again, of course, the world's best access to fresh water, and eventually water is going to supplant oil as the world's most precious resource. And that is something we need to be thinking about as we attract talent to this region. I do want to follow up on something that Stephen and Glenn were talking about. Stephen, when you think about fewer jobs in the auto industry, it's really more of a shift of jobs in the auto industry. I mean, Glenn talked about, less manual labor and far more technical in nature. Absolutely. But there might be fewer jobs that where people are working for, say, Ford, GM, or Toyota, the final assembly, but there potentially are going to be just as many, if not more, jobs in the supply chain, especially if we get the battery business, right? So it's really a shift from the OEMs to the supply chain. That's one of the reasons why getting the supply chain, including and especially batteries, is so important, because that's where a lot of the jobs are going to be.
Guys, one of the things that Ford cited when it placed these new EV facilities in Tennessee and Kentucky was cheap, plentiful energy. What can Michigan do to be more competitive in that area?
Well, I think that's, and as I said earlier, that's one of the major factors for site selection is the non-labor inputs like energy. Tennessee sits in the TVA region, and so there's a very strong advantage there. But the fact is that we've been uncompetitive in those rates. Our power utility companies, though, have stepped up to the plate. They have provided rates for new investments, which are as competitive as anywhere. So I think that's a major, major step. But we need to look at, really what do companies look for that want to grow or that want to come here, and they want the red carpet treatment. They want things to move fast. They don't want to be encumbered by policy or regulation. They'll adhere to it, but they want things to move fast, particularly now when you look at the investments that are made in the battery and the semiconductor supply chain. Are we being quick? Are we being responsive? And are we providing that whole suite of services? And at the end of the day, that deciding factor, is there a workforce and talent pool available? And are you going to partner on it with me, government, regional, local, municipality, to build that?
So I want to go back to the education question and drill down just a little on a couple of specific areas. I want to separate the K-12 and the higher ed segments and talk about what we are not doing and need to do on each end. And I think that they're very different questions in many ways. But everybody agrees, of course, that in order to produce the talent that we need to fill these jobs, and of course, in order to produce the entrepreneurs who will come up with the great ideas that will create opportunities here. We need to do better. So Sandy, I'm going to start with you. Let's talk about what needs to be done at K-12 and what we're not doing in higher ed.
Well, K-12 really needs a wholesale reboot, frankly, of how we educate the young people in the state of Michigan. And this is something that, can't be done without educators and administrators, the private sector, and the political sector. There's been too many solutions proposed that have gone nowhere, that have just been one side. The education community says we need to do X. The business community says we need to do Y. This needs to be collaborative. That's why, the Detroit Regional Chamber, has been a founding member of this effort called Launch Michigan, that many others are at the table at, including all those parties that I just mentioned. We are now, I think, in our third year. It is hard work, and it is not, and it's certainly not fast work. But we need to really take a look at that fundamentally. How do we, really make that graduation certificate, that diploma, actually mean something? Right now it doesn't mean enough. How do we ensure that the disparity between the haves and have-nots isn't a death sentence, frankly, for your future if you're born in the wrong zip code? Education used to be the equalizer in American society. Now, frankly, it's not. It's just yet another thing that is driving the wealth divide in our country. At the higher ed level, first of all, and I'll echo what Glenn said a few minutes ago, it is no longer sufficient, even remotely sufficient. I don't care if it's in the mobility industry, the healthcare industry, or the construction industry, to say that just a 12-year education is enough. We need to move the standard to 14 years. Basically K through 12 plus 2. Either 2 years of community college or a year or two of a skilled certificate program. That needs to be the baseline, and the quality of that education needs to be high, and we need to make that the standard. Not that, going to a 2-year school or enrolling in a 4-year school, that's a nice to do. It needs to be like, this is what you need just to survive and succeed in life today. That is a cultural change. That is a change in how we invest, and it's a change in how we think about the structure of public education in the state.
Yeah, I just would add real quick, Nolan, just the fact that there's no question that we make things in the state, and we want to continue to make things forever, literally for the next 100 years. And that is really important. But the growth in real median income is going to come if we have higher levels of educational attainment, invest in higher education, and specifically we're investing in the infrastructure and communities, the place, as we call it, because that's what's going to drive talent growth. That's what companies are going to grow around. The other thing I just wanted to mention real quick that really concerns me, and we talk about this, is our ratio of counselors, which provide career pathways, not just counseling service. We are second worst in the country. We're 741 students on average to one counselor. The national average is 400. The recommended is 250. That's a real serious sore spot for us as a state that we need to address.
Well, we've got a question from Ed on Facebook who wants to know which states are getting it right, which states are doing very much better than we are.
Yeah, there's not a state that is firing on all cylinders, both at the K through 12 level and the higher ed level. But I'll give you some examples. The state of Tennessee has made tremendous progress on on the higher ed side. Tremendous progress. They were one of the first to set a goal of 55% of their adults with a 2-year or 4-year degree. They made community college essentially free. They've really kind of worked at this throughout the state to make that the standard. That 2 years is kind of the standard now that you need to achieve. At the K through 12 level, you can look at Minnesota. Not perfect, but they've been working on this for 20 years, and they're doing some good work there. And the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts has done some good work. Again, no one's got it really right. Florida as well too, at the K through 12 level. Tremendous progress over the last 20 years at the K through 12 level.
And one of the things that I think is key in those states, and I know more about Massachusetts and Tennessee than some of the others. It is that cooperation or collaboration, I guess, between the education community and politics and business. Now, it's not perfect in any of those places, but they have a lot more of it than we do here. Would you agree with that, Sandy?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, no, I just real quickly, I'd say clearly that's happening. I mean, in Massachusetts, you got a Republican governor and a Democratic legislature, but they're getting it done. You know, in Tennessee, this was all driven by a Republican governor. And, you know, oftentimes we think of Republicans as the ones standing in the way. But, you know, here are some examples where Republicans are leading and they're working collaboratively with their Democratic counterparts.
So we've got another question. Kevin is interested in the startup environment here, and we know it's becoming a very aggressive startup market around mobility and EVs. What do we need to do to assure a higher success rate for those startups? And you know, how likely are many or most of them to sort of take root and succeed here?
Well, I would say leverage our strengths. And I'll give you a very specific example. Right now, the MEDC is redone their strategic plan, and they've expanded it in some sectors. And one of them is where the intersection of outdoor technology and recreation meets mobility. So this is something that we could own and we will own because there's focus here. And that really is going to be driven by startups and innovation. So if you look at the natural resources, the companies that are already innovating in that space, and by the way, the outdoor recreation market, and that includes everything from the van life to new types of skis to electric snowmobiles, that intersection can happen here at Michigan. But what we need to do, again, is provide the environment for them to succeed, make sure we have the funding that can be there for state startups and things like that. And really, it's going to depend on, do people want to come here to start businesses? Is there that community in place? And can we retain grads with higher education or just new ideas here in Michigan to do that?
Well, a lot of these startups are spinning off of our universities, and we do have some very impressive universities and some very well-resourced universities in this state. What role do places like Michigan State, University of Michigan, Michigan Tech, and the others play in moving this EV future forward?
They're playing a tremendous role. Every single one of them. They're very committed. And you could pick a university from Lawrence Tech to all the way up to Northern and Michigan Tech to Grand Valley to the small private colleges. They're all very attuned to the fact that when you look at autonomous, electrified, shared, and connected, there's tremendous opportunity here for new startups. So I would say that the bigger universities that are a lot more well-funded and able to get those grants, that they're doing their thing. But I do think that most all universities and community colleges are focused on the new innovation that can bubble up and how again, it's going to be key that we keep it here and we keep that talent here as we move along the path.
I want to talk a little about the shift to mobility and the idea of mobility and away from just cars and the cars, I guess, the way that we conceive of them today and how that will affect work. You know, the idea of there being a much broader approach to all of this because there are so many different ways that people are going to use to get around. What effect does that have on the jobs that will exist? And then again, the preparation that we need to be providing so that we can take advantage of it. Glenn, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess I'll put it in the context of our biggest company. And you look at what they're doing with their vehicles that we know and the new ones that they've invented and are testing, like cruise automation. That's General Motors. Their whole mantra and mission is surrounded around really how do we contribute to solving global problems as opposed to adding to them. And that's no congestion, no accidents, and no pollution. And that's really what's driving these things. And that can come in different forms of multimodal transportation. because different forms need it. We had the Dutch ambassador here yesterday, and that we all know the bike culture they have there, obviously, but they're electrifying the bike culture. With that comes some challenges too. So I think we have an opportunity here, not just to be looking at how we put the world on four wheels and how we transform that, but how we transform different forms of transportation depending on what people need and where they live, rural, urban, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Sandy?
Yeah, so this series is called The Future of Work, right? And the future of work is probably one of the most timely issues that our society is dealing with right now, because we are really at this intersection of transformative change in technology, which is going to transform how we actually move about with the pandemic, which obviously accelerated these things like work from home. I mean, it was only 2 years ago, right, when all the people that we worked with or worked in our organization said, "Oh my goodness, I can't possibly work from home. That'll never work." And now that organizations are trying to bring people back to the office, say, "Wait a minute, there's no possible way that I can go back to the office." So the world has changed dramatically, and it is really film at 11 in terms of how this is going to unfold, how these different intersections of how technology is changing, how societal norms are changing in terms of what does it mean to work and where do you work, along with this mobility thing. I mean, I remember Glenn and I talking about when we banded together to really turbocharge MICHauto, no pun intended. We were thinking about one of the issues that when the autonomous vehicle really becomes a reality and really becomes kind of commonplace, which obviously we're finding is much more difficult than we initially thought 5, 6, 7 years ago, is who owns the time? If you're in an autonomous vehicle and you start off from home and you are going to the office, who owns that time if you don't have to do anything other than sit there? You got your whatever is an iPad at that point, or whatever built-in screen is there. Are you going to be expected to work on your way in and your way home? Who knows, right? I mean, we have yet to figure out some of these cultural norms.
The other thing I would add, and it's something we really look at with talent, because it's going to, again, drive this, is what kind of environment, meaning philosophical, political, welcoming environment, does a place have? And for Michigan to succeed, we're going to have, and I just talk about the auto industry, an auto industry that looks like the world, that is diverse and inclusive. And I'm not saying that just because I'm saying it, because studies show that the ROI is there too. But young people particularly, they want to live, they want to work, and they want to play in a place where they know they have the rights to do what they want to do. They have a community, they have digital broadband, and they have that flexibility, because the remote work, the gig work, it's all here to stay. And Michigan has to be adaptable to all those different things, otherwise we don't grow.
Hey, gentlemen, as we wrap this up, how are you going to bring this issue to Mackinac for the policy conference?
Well, I guess I'll answer that one. So, first of all, we have several CEO panels that are going to be talking about the future of work, what that means, and how the pandemic has changed it. We have 2 speakers, very high-profile speakers, that are going to be talking about transportation, infrastructure, the grid, and what electrification means for the grid. Nolan and Stephen, you guys are my dear friends, but I can't tell you who those people are, especially on air like this. But we'll be announcing those names pretty quickly. But yes, the issue of future of work, the future of electrification, and what it means for Michigan will definitely be on there. And we're also doing not 1, but 2 panels on the economic development aspects. What is the economic development policy that is really needed in the state to address the issues that the 2 of you have been raising in this conversation? How does Michigan be competitive? What does Michigan need to do from a policy standpoint to ensure that the mobility industry of the 21st century is here in Michigan and we don't lose it to someplace else?
And one of the things we're also doing before the conference, the Mackinac Policy Conference starts, for our 6th year now, we will have what we call MICHauto on the island. We have 40 executives, CEOs, and presidents of companies of all shapes and sizes, from traditional to new tech players, coming up the day before the conference starts for private conversations, meetings with the governor, meetings with the state, discussion on electrification, how it impacts, and really on a talent supply chain for 24 hours. Pretty intense. We do this every year, and we have actions coming out of that. So that is really all the things we've talked about today will be front and center with our automotive and tech executives on Mackinac Island just before the Mackinac Policy Conference kicks off.
Yeah. Okay, well, that is going to do it for this month's Future of Work Town Hall. I want to thank everyone for joining us today online and remind you that there is a short survey in the comments section. If you could fill that out, that would be really great. Thanks to Sandy Baruah with the Detroit Regional Chamber, and of course, Glenn Stevens of MICHauto for being with us. Come back next month for the next Future of Work Town Hall, where Will Glover is going to be talking about placemaking.
So head on over to the One Detroit website for more information. Follow us on social media and sign up for our weekly newsletter. For One Detroit, we'll see you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
Support for this program is provided by